A lone campfire crackled in the darkness of the Amazon jungle, casting flickering shadows on three haggard figures. Colonel Percy Fawcett knelt beside the flame, his weathered hand steady as he wrote by the dim light of a lantern. All around him, the rainforest was alive with the whispers, the drone of unseen insects, the distant cries of night creatures, and the pounding of his own heart. Just beyond the fire's glow loomed an impenetrable wall of black foliage, as if the jungle itself were watching. Fawcett paused and glanced at his companions. His son Jack lay exhausted on a bed of leaves, and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel shivered under a thin blanket, feverish and weak. They were hungry and footsore, worn down by weeks of punishing travel. Hundreds of miles of unforgiving wilderness separated them from civilization, yet in Fawcett's eyes burned an unyielding light. He carefully folded the letter he had been writing, aware it might be his last message to the outside world. By dawn, this small expedition would plunge deeper into the unknown. They were driven onward by Fawcett's unwavering belief that just beyond the next green horizon lay the prize he had chased for years, a lost ancient city hidden somewhere in this endless sea of trees. To understand how Percy Fawcett came to be stranded in the heart of the Amazon, one must go back to the roots of his obsession. Fawcett was no ordinary explorer, born into a family of modest aristocratic means. In 1867, he grew up with adventure in his blood. As a young British officer, he learned to regard the risk of death as the most piquant sauce to life, and it showed. Over the years, Fawcett had mapped uncharted jungles, stared down deadly pit vipers and anacondas, and forged friendships with remote tribal peoples where others would have met poison arrows. His exploits made headlines around the world and even inspired Arthur Conan Doyle's novel, The Lost World. By the early 1900s, amid tales of lost golden cities and ancient kingdoms, Fawcett became convinced that deep within the Brazilian Amazon lay something extraordinary. Spanish conquistadors had once whispered of El Dorado, cities of gold hidden in the green wilds. Most dismissed those stories as fevered myths, but Fawcett dug up compelling clues, reports of strange hieroglyphics on jungle ruins, and an old Brazilian document known as Manuscript 512 that told of a lost stone city deep in the rainforest. Piece by piece, the explorer formed a vision of what he simply called Zed, a lost city that could prove a sophisticated ancient civilization once thrived in the Amazon. Fawcett's belief in Z became a fiery obsession. He spoke of this quest as if guided by destiny. After serving in the Great War, he immediately set his sights back on the jungle. Earlier expeditions to find Z had ended in frustration. Torrential rains, malaria, and exhaustion had forced him to turn back more than once. Yet each failure only strengthened his resolve. By 1925, now 57 years old but as fit and driven as ever, Colonel Fawcett marshaled support for one final push into the unknown. He refused funding from newspapers that wanted to turn the endeavor into a publicity stunt. He would do this his way, on a shoestring budget, but with pure intent. Accompanying him would be only two trusted partners, his 21-year-old son Jack, who shared his almost spiritual zeal for discovery, and Jack's best friend Raleigh Rimmel. Fawcett turned away more famous volunteers. Even the famed T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, offered to come, preferring a small, tight-knit party that could move quietly. In January 1925, Fawcett bid goodbye to his wife Nina and his younger children in England, promising he would return with evidence of the glorious city he had dreamed about for so long. The trio set sail for South America and arrived in Brazil's frontier town of Cuiabá, the last outpost of civilization before the wilderness. With them they brought machetes, rifles, mosquito netting, canned food, and a few precious keepsakes, including a mysterious, small jade idol Fawcett carried, believing it might curry favor with indigenous tribes. Local guides and pack animals were hired in Cuiabá, and on April 20th, 1925, the expedition ventured forth from that dusty town. As their horses and mules trudged into the emerald veil of the jungle, Percy Fawcett felt the thrill of destiny. He was heading into the blank spaces on the map, determined to write a new chapter in history with each step into the green abyss. From the moment Fawcett's team plunged into the rainforest, they were engulfed by nature's overwhelming presence. Towering ceiba trees and twisted vines formed a green cathedral around them, shutting out the sun. The air was hot and wet, like a steam bath, and every step forward required slashing through dense undergrowth with machetes. In the first weeks, the expedition's most relentless enemies were not jaguars or snakes, but insects. Clouds of mosquitoes whined in their ears and feasted on any exposed skin. Tiny sandflies and gnats swarmed their camp at dusk, driving the men mad with itching bites. By day, voracious ticks burrowed into their clothes and flesh. One morning, Rimmel awoke with a burning, swollen foot. Dozens of tick bites had become infected, making it agony for him to walk. Despite these torments, Colonel Fawcett pressed the group onward at a punishing pace. Determined to cover as much ground as possible before the worst of the rainy season, he urged them to march 10, even 15 miles a day, through trackless terrain. Jack and Rimmel struggled to keep up with the seasoned explorer. Rimmel limped in pain from his injured foot, and Jack swatted swarms of mosquitoes away from his friend as they trudged forward. Even when exhaustion weighed on them like a leaden pack, Fawcett's enthusiasm remained undimmed. In the evenings, he would consult his compass and maps by firelight, muttering about how the rivers and hills matched the clues in his documents about the hidden city. Seeing his determination, the younger men steeled themselves to endure. They joked quietly that if the insects didn't eat them alive first, Fawcett's marching pace might finish the job. Still, they respected the colonel immensely. He seemed to draw energy from the jungle that drained everyone else. One afternoon, Fawcett got so far ahead on the trail that by nightfall, Jack and Rimmel could no longer find him. The jungle's shadows deepened, and a rising chorus of howls and croaks signaled that darkness was closing in fast. With alarm, as the two young men realized they were suddenly alone in an endless maze of trees, they shouted Fawcett's name into the dim green twilight until their voices were lost in the cacophony of the forest. There was no response. Eventually, they huddled back to back under a giant tree, clutching their rifles and straining to hear a sign of the colonel through the eerie night sounds. It was a long, sleepless night for Jack and Rimmel. Every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes set their hearts pounding. Only at dawn did their fears subside. As pale light filtered through the canopy, they stumbled forward and found Fawcett calmly waiting for them a short distance ahead, brewing a pot of tea over a small fire. He greeted them with a warm grin, as if a night spent alone in the wild were nothing unusual. Jack and Rimmel were too relieved to scold him. In that moment, they realized just how at home Percy Fawcett was in this wilderness that others feared. His confidence was infectious. After a quick breakfast, he adjusted their packs, nodded at his son and friend, and set off on the march once more, deeper into the unknown. As weeks passed and the expedition penetrated further into uncharted territory, the jungle tested them in new ways. Their stock of canned food and dried provisions was dwindling, forcing them to live off the land. Fawcett proved crack shot with his rifle. On one desperate evening, he brought down a toucan and a monkey for supper, ensuring his hungry party had meat to roast over the fire. But there were days when even the colonel's iron will was strained by the journey's toll. Rimmel's injured foot slowly healed, yet he and Jack each shed pounds from incessant hiking and sparse rations. Fever struck Rimmel not long after his foot improved. He shivered miserably in his hammock one humid night, delirious with chills, while Jack kept cool compresses on his brow. In these dark moments, Percy Fawcett's leadership shone brightest. He mixed quinine powder from their medical kit into a canteen and carefully poured it between Rimmel's lips, staying up all night to watch over the boy. By dawn, the young man's fever broke. Fawcett allowed an extra rest day for Raleigh to recover, though every delay ate at his nerves. As he carved a notch into a tree to mark their camp, the colonel silently wondered how much farther Z could be. Despite his worry, he never voiced doubt. Instead, he smiled at his team and remarked how proud he was of their resilience. Not all of the jungle's trials came from nature. Some came from the unseen presence of other humans. The explorers could sense eyes on them from the greenery at times, and they found occasional signs that they were not entirely alone. A faint column of smoke on the horizon, footprints by a riverbank, the echo of distant voices carried on the wind. One afternoon, as the group waded across a shallow creek, an arrow suddenly hissed through the air and struck the water with a plunk, inches from Jack's boot. The party froze. On the far bank, partially concealed by ferns, stood a group of indigenous warriors with bows drawn. Their faces and bodies were painted with streaks of red and black, and they stared intensely at the intruders who had entered their domain. The two guides murmured in fear. This territory was known to be dangerous. Quickly, Fawcett raised his right hand, palm out, a universal gesture of peace, and signaled for everyone to lower their weapons. In his left hand, he held up a gift, a bright blue trade bead necklace that gleamed in the sun. For a long, tense moment, neither side moved. Then one of the warriors emerged slowly from the foliage, eyes fixed on the strange, older white man who stood calmly in the creek. Fawcett spoke softly, using a few words from a local dialect he had learned, and pointing to the necklace. At last, the painted man lowered his bow. He beckoned cautiously for the outsiders to come ashore. Fawcett and his companions had passed an unspoken test. By evening, they were led to the warriors' village, a small settlement of thatched huts hidden in a clearing. Dozens of curious faces peered at the newcomers. The tribe turned out to be surprisingly welcoming. Once it was clear Fawcett's group meant no harm. Women brought them roasted fish and cassava bread, and children gathered around to marvel at Jack's pale blue eyes and Ralika Kispap. Words which he demonstrated to their delighted giggles. Around a communal fire, Fawcett communicated with the village elders as best he could, aided by gestures and a few phrases the guides translated. Through this halting dialogue, he learned that these people rarely encountered outsiders, and they spoke of other tribes farther east who were far more hostile. When Fawcett carefully asked about ancient ruins or a lost city, the elders exchanged uneasy glances. One elder drew a symbol in the dirt, a crude outline of a tall, pyramid-like structure, and gestured toward the east. He spoke a few words with a grave expression. The guides whispered a translation. The elder was warning that beyond the next great river, in the lands of the fierce people, there were indeed stone ruins deep in the forest, remnants of a time long past. But those ruins, he cautioned, were cursed or protected by dangerous spirits. Many who sought them never returned. That night, under the safety of the villagers' protection, Fawcett gazed up at the stars glimmering above the Amazon canopy. His heart pounded with excitement. The native's story was the closest thing to confirmation he had ever heard. Somewhere, out there, beyond the river that lay ahead, might lie the very city of Z he had been chasing. Jack shared his father's excitement. In a hushed voice, he wondered if they could be on the brink of an extraordinary discovery. Raleigh Beowi Sacho. Rimmel, however, sat quietly by the fire, chewing on the last of the cassava bread with a troubled look. The talk of fierce tribes and cursed ruins had unsettled him. In his journal that evening, Rimmel wrote, by Schuss dies Steintes see. Perhaps we are crossing into realms man was not meant to trespass. Despite his private fears, Rimmel resolved to follow his friend Jack and Colonel Fawcett wherever they led. After 2 days of rest and hospitality, the expedition prepared to move on. The villagers stocked them with fresh water and a bundle of smoked fish, but neither the guides nor any of the tribe dared go with them farther east. The river ahead, the Upper Xingu, was considered the border of the unknown. Fawcett understood. This was exactly why he had chosen a small party willing to plunge ahead when all others turned back. He thanked the elder sincerely, leaving gifts of beads and a knife in gratitude. On the morning of May 29th, 1925, Percy Fawcett, Jack Fawcett, and Raleigh Rimmel said their farewells and pushed off in a dugout canoe to cross the broad, sluggish waters of the Upper Xingu. Behind them on the shore, the friendly villagers and the 2 hired guides watched anxiously. Those men would go no further. In the middle of the river, Fawcett turned and raised his arm in a final wave. Then the dense foliage swallowed them on the opposite bank. The expedition had passed the last signpost of the familiar world. Ahead lay the unbroken green wilderness, and somewhere within it, the answer to Fawcett's iFairy war Slyrus Asnastasur Luhalfer Lalamao Yong dream. The expedition's final camp on the western bank of the Upper Xingu would later be known by a foreboding name, Dead Horse Camp. It was the same spot where, on a previous journey years before, Fawcett's horse had collapsed and died, forcing him to turn back. This time, however, Fawcett had no intention of turning back. On the night of May 28th, under the pale glow of firelight, he penned one last round of letters and dispatches to be sent home. In his letter to his wife, Nina, Fawcett was upbeat and confident despite all they had endured. Jack is well and fit and getting stronger every day, he assured her. You need have no fear of any failure. He also sent words of love and a promise that they would soon succeed in their quest. These letters, along with updates to his sponsors, were entrusted to the 2 guides who would be returning to civilization in the morning. By dawn on May 29th, the explorers packed the camp for the last time. Percy Fawcett took a final look at the familiar faces of his guides as he handed over the precious packet of letters. The guides, tough as they were, looked worried and implored the colonel to reconsider going further. But Fawcett only smiled calmly and gripped their hands in gratitude. This was as far as anyone not consumed by the dream could go. With hugs and well wishes, the last ties to the outside world departed. Fawcett, his son, and Rimmel were now truly on their own. The trio used a small dugout canoe to ferry themselves and their gear across the misty Xingu as the sun crept over the treetops. From mid-river, Fawcett turned and waved to the figures of the guides and friendly tribespeople watching from the distant shore. Jack and Raleigh raised their paddles in salute as well. Then, as their canoe slid into the tangled green fringe on the far side, that audience of onlookers lost sight of them. The jungle closed around Percy Fawcett and his 2 companions, swallowing them in its primeval embrace. They had passed the point of no return. Ahead of them lay the untamed wilderness that had lured Fawcett for so long, and somewhere within it, if fate was kind, the lost city of Z. After Percy Fawcett's little canoe disappeared into the eastern forests of the Xingu, no outsider ever saw him or his companions again. The 3 explorers vanished without a trace, leaving the world to wonder what fate befell them in that green labyrinth. Days turned to weeks, then months, with no word. At first, Fawcett had warned everyone that he would be out of contact for an extended time, so there was no immediate alarm. But as 1925 rolled into 1926, and still no message emerged from the Amazon. Concern gave way to panic, and then to grim acceptance that something had gone terribly wrong. Back in England, Nina Fawcett refused to believe her husband and son were dead. She clung to hope year after year, certain Percy would find a way to send news or emerge from the jungle victorious. The Royal Geographical Society, however, grew anxious. In 1927, 2 years after the expedition's last sighting, they sponsored a search party led by the explorer George Miller. Dyat retraced Fawcett's route and heard whispers from tribes about a violent end. But he found no definitive proof of the explorer's fate. His conclusion was that Fawcett likely had perished, but without evidence, the mystery lingered. Over the following decades, more than a dozen expeditions would attempt to solve the puzzle of Fawcett's disappearance. It's often said that many of those would-be rescuers met their own doom in the jungle, chasing a ghost. The legend of the lost colonel seemed to cast a curse of its own. With no solid answers, speculation ran rampant. Newspapers and adventure magazines spun fantastical theories to an avid public. Some claimed that Fawcett must have found the lost city of Z and was living there still, perhaps having gone native and become the chief of a hidden tribe. Others rumored he was being held prisoner by cannibalistic warriors deep in the interior. A particularly outlandish tale imagined that Fawcett had stumbled into a secret utopian civilization and chosen never to return, deciding to guard its secrets forever. There were also darker theories that the team was massacred by the very fierce Indians they'd been warned about, their bones scattered in some unknown village, or that they succumbed to starvation and disease, dying painfully alone in the jungle with no way to call for help. Years later, one indigenous account from the Kalapalo people, the last known tribe to see Fawcett alive, described how the explorers had confidently marched eastward, ignoring warnings. The Kalapalo watched the smoke of Fawcett's campfires recede further each day until about a week in, the fires died out completely. The forest they said, fell silent, a sign that the three strangers had met their end at the hands of hostile warriors beyond the Kalapalo territory. But without bodies or artifacts to confirm any story, Fawcett's end remained an enigma. In 1951, human bones were retrieved from a remote area and rumored to be Fawcett's remains. But forensic tests proved inconclusive or false. The only thing those searches and investigations achieved was to deepen the mystique surrounding the lost expedition. Fawcett had vanished into legend, becoming a cautionary tale for some and a source of inspiration for others. His unwavering faith in a hidden ancient city ignited the imaginations of countless people. In the decades since his disappearance, archaeologists and explorers continued to probe the Amazon's secrets, and astonishingly, they began to find evidence that Percy's intuition may have been right all along. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, researchers uncovered traces of what once were large, complex settlements in parts of the Amazon that had been thought uninhabited. From the ground and air, they identified geometric earthworks, long-vanished roads and bridges, and the remains of expansive communities where tens of thousands of people may have lived centuries ago. In the very region of the Xingu where Fawcett hunted for Z, excavations have revealed a network of earth mounds, plazas, and defensive moats, possibly the remnants of an ancient city-state. The press dubbed it Kuhikugu, and it might have flourished about 1,000 years ago, before the jungle reclaimed it. It wasn't exactly a lost city of gold, but it was proof that advanced civilizations truly had existed in the Amazon rainforest. Percy Fawcett never lived to see this validation of his dreams. Yet his legacy endures. His quest has been recounted in books, documentaries, and films, ensuring that new generations know the story of the explorer who ventured into the unknown in search of a myth. The character of the bold, fedora-wearing archaeologist adventurer in popular culture, think Indiana Jones, owes more than a little to Colonel Fawcett's real-life exploits. Most of all, Fawcett's journey stands as a testament to the power of human curiosity and courage. He dared to believe in wonders that others dismissed and was willing to stake everything on that belief. In the end, Percy Fawcett did not find his lost city, but he became a part of its legend. The Amazon keeps its secrets, and somewhere in that vast green ocean of trees, the remains of Fawcett and his companions may rest alongside the ruins he sought, forever entwined with the fate of the ancient civilization that inspired him. His story reminds us that the world still harbors mysteries, and that there are individuals brave enough to chase them into oblivion. Colonel Percy Fawcett vanished into the Amazon, but the spirit of his adventure lives on. It lives on in every explorer who ventures off the map, in every scholar who questions the known history, and in every dreamer who gazes into the jungle and wonders what lost city might lie sleeping under the vines, waiting for its story to be told.